Hello, good afternoon. Just wanted to double check to see if we have all the regents present. Based on my view, I don't think I can see them all. Amy, is there anyone that we're waiting for?
Chair Lozar, I'm doing a quick count now, and I believe we have all board members.
Okay, excellent. Well, then let's get the meeting started. Good afternoon, and welcome to a special Board of Regents meeting. Just a kind of a friendly heads up, reminder that this call is being recorded and that all the participants should mute their lines now. Thank you. I'm going to ask Amy if she can quickly take roll call. Amy?
Thank you. Chair Lozar?
Here.
Thank you. Regent Nicetoon?
I'm here.
Thank you. Regent Sheehy?
Here.
Thank you. Regent Sexton?
Here.
Thank you. Regent Rogers?
Here.
Thank you. Regent Dombrowski? We'll come back to Joyce here in just a second. Regent Huss?
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Christian?
I'm here.
Thank you. I believe Governor Bullock is represented today by Ms. McCall Flynn. McCall, are you on?
Yep, I'm on. Thank you.
Thank you. And Superintendent Elsie Arnston, are you with us?
You bet. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Let's see. Just want to double check on Regent Dombrowski. I'm looking through the list now. We do still have a few people joining, and I believe we're waiting for Joyce.
We'll give her maybe just a minute. I think while we're waiting for Regent Dombrowski, maybe I can kick off the meeting with just a few remarks to give Regent Dombrowski some time to join us, and then we can dive into this afternoon's agenda. Thanks again, Amy, for taking roll call. If you could give me a heads up when Regent Dombrowski joins, that would be appreciated. So I appreciate all the board members and others making time on their summer schedules to have this meeting today. While we're all experiencing a very different type of Montana summer due to the pandemic, I hope that everyone has had some fun this summer and found time to enjoy our beautiful weather. We gathered today to review and address as a board the recommendations and guidelines for campuses across the Montana University system as they take steps to prepare for a healthy return to on-campus classes this fall. Board members have been given several updates at recent meetings and regarding the task force work and efforts to assist our campuses during this really challenging time. I want to extend my thanks and appreciation to the task force members, the Healthy Fall task force members, for their hard work and their focus on creating the parameters that we'll be discussing today. I especially want to thank Commissioner Christian for helping to lead this efforts, along with State Medical Officer Dr. Holzman, all the members of the task force, Deputy Commissioner Tessman, and some OCHI staff members, Christine Miller and Rebecca Power, for all your work over the past 4.5 months, outlining meetings and ideas to make sure that our return in here just a few weeks is going to be taking into consideration all the aspects of making sure our campuses are healthy for our student, staff, faculty, and community. The purpose of today's agenda is to allow for a comprehensive discussion of the Montana University Healthy Fall 2020 recommendations and planning guidelines that will elevate our conversation and consideration to the point of a formal board action today. Our discussion will be preceded by a brief presentation by Deputy Commissioner Brock Tessman, who chaired the 12-member task force. Deputy Commissioner Tessman will provide a summary of the 11 different planning areas covered by the task force. These planning areas offer guidance to campuses on everything from delivering quality instruction to campus safety and security to requirements regarding face coverings. In addition, Deputy Commissioner Tessman will discuss a set of overall guidelines offered by the task force, ranging from travel policy to communications, coordination, and accessibility issues. I believe Dr. Tessman is going to summarize the recent recommendations based on a task force meeting earlier this month regarding requiring face coverings at the university system campuses. And I've also asked Deputy Commissioner Tessman to outline the process and the timeline the task force used to develop its guidelines, the handbook that you have in the agenda, and the manner in which campus experts and public health experts were consulted along the way. So after this brief presentation, I'm sure Deputy Commissioner Tessman will be happy to stand for questions and engage with us as we consider the guidelines and recommendations for us. I should note that today we will also review and vote on meeting minutes from our recent June conference call. Before we do that, I'd ask Commissioner Christian if you have anything to add to this topic before turning it over to before taking action on the meeting minutes and turning it over to Deputy Commissioner Tessman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, like to extend my thanks also to everybody making availability as we continue to navigate these incredibly challenging times and waters, and appreciate the feedback that we'll receive today, and appreciate the feedback that we received at the May meeting. Incorporating that into our overall plans is incredibly important. Just a couple notes, if I could. I'd like to extend our very best wishes on behalf of the entire MUS to Dan Edelman as he departs his role at MSU Billings. Certainly that announcement went out this week. We wish him and his family the very best as they navigate their own challenging times. And at the same time, I'd like to thank Rolf Groseth, who I see has joined us. Dr. Groseth is no stranger to the MUS, and we very much appreciate him stepping out of otherwise peaceful retirement at a busy time in his own life to rejoin us. Probably more than thanking Rolf, we need to thank Janie as well. She may be the real one that's giving back to the MUS once again, but thanks, Rolf, for joining us and your willingness to serve in that capacity. Mr. Chair, I think we can dive into the heart of it.
Yeah, so before we dive in, let's you can see on the agenda approval of minutes from our June 30th conference call. I will entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 30th.
So moved.
Moved by Regent Dombrowski?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Is there any discussion or comments from members of the board? Any comments or discussion from the campuses? And if so, please use your raise your hand feature located at the bottom of the screen, or dial *9 if joining by phone. Are there any comments or discussion from campuses? Amy, seeing none?
Seeing none, Chair Lozar.
Thank you, Amy. Is there any public comment on the June 30th meeting minutes? Any public comment? If so, again, please use the raise your hand feature or dial *9 if you're joining by phone. Any public comment? Not hearing Amy saying there's any public comment. I will call for the vote. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. All right, well, let's move on to the primary agenda item for today. We've got an action item regarding the request for adoption of the Montana University Healthy Fall 2020 Planning Guidelines. I will turn this over to Deputy Commissioner Brock Tessman to provide some context regarding the work of the Healthy Fall Task Force and the guidelines and handbook that you can see in our agenda. Deputy Commissioner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
All right. And definitely, I appreciate the chance to talk a little bit about the good work of this task force. I'll be fairly brief, but I do want to go through the guidelines the task force developed, at least in some detail. I know this worked pretty well, and so I'll be fairly conversational, and I guess goes without saying, but invite members of the board to interrupt or ask clarification questions throughout if it makes sense to you. First thing, a lot of thank yous have gone out already, but I get to sit here and talk to you all today about the task force's work, but truly the 11 members of the task force, John Harbour, and then Reed Humphrey, Steve Thompson at UM, Bob Makwa, Karina Beck, Stephanie Gray, MSU and Bozeman, Chancellor Cook, Vice Chancellor Arnold at Montana Tech and MSU Billings, Dave Kruger and Nicole Hazelbaker at MSU Northern and UM Western, respectively. And then our two-year colleges, Leanne Frost and Sandy Bauman, represented them. And then very importantly, at the OCHI level, the task force was staffed by Christine Miller and Rebecca Power, and they just did a tremendous amount of work. A lot of it between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And really this was a heavy lift. So many thanks to them, and many thanks to the campus teams as well. I think you all know this, but each of our campuses has somewhere between a dozen and in some cases upwards to 100 individuals working directly on plans for the fall. And I guess in reality, everyone is working in that direction, but there was a lot of specific attention given to planning for the fall, and I think that deserves some recognition. It's also an important lead-in point for me because I'll emphasize throughout my brief presentation here that what the Healthy Fall Task Force did was provide planning guidelines, and that's our role. Sideboards, if you will. The campuses themselves have really put pen to paper and built out the detailed kind of operational plans that really only they can. They know their campus physically, they know the culture, they know the environment, and so that's an important clarification to make right from the get-go. These are planning guidelines. The campuses built plans themselves. What I'll do is break my presentation up into three sections. One, I would like to talk a little bit about the process of building the guidelines, how we formed the task force, the method of meeting, the way in which we met. I'd like to, of course, go through the guidelines themselves and provide a very brief summary. I'd like to address the subsequent recommendation regarding face coverings and talk a little bit about the work that is going on right now in preparation for the fall. Of course, I'll stand for questions if you, Mr. Chair, find that suitable after I'm done with my presentation. And throughout, I don't want to lose track of four key threads, and I'm going to put them up front just because I think they're really points of emphasis, and I want to make sure they don't get buried or that I don't miss them. The first key thread is that as much as possible, this was an open and inclusive process. And really, we had a fairly small task force, but we branched out to campus expert networks, public health, as you noted, Mr. Chair. The meetings that we had were open and posted meetings. We did have media join some of the meetings along the way. It was an open process, and of course, it's still underway. I think the second key point I want to make is that we always say we're monitoring the situation, we're open for adjustment. And I think the commissioner says that anytime I hear him talk about the fall. That's absolutely true. At the same time, we have to plan for an in-person experience in the fall if we want to even have that on the option or on the table as an option. We still always have the ability to monitor and adjust as necessary, But if we don't plan, we don't have any option at all. And I think that's the kind of spirit behind such detailed planning as we've engaged in this summer. The third key thread really is truly that we're continuing to look at the evolving public health situation. We'll continue to make adjustments as necessary. The face covering requirement being, I think, an important example there. The last key thread of the four, we have to put in place the right structure for a healthy fall. A lot of that comes through these guidelines, the campus plans. I think as administrators, that's our responsibility to build the right environment, put the right protocols in place. And maybe I'm speaking a little bit off the cuff here, but I think in reality, a successful fall, it's a collective responsibility, and it's going to depend a lot on student behavior, faculty and staff behavior, community behavior. We have to live up to the expectations we've all set for ourselves, because it's going to take a lot. And we're all up for the task, but it's going to take a lot for us to put these protocols into action in the right way and make sure we mitigate risks the way that we know we can. So it is kind of a collective responsibility I'd want to highlight as we move forward. Okay, so a little bit on the process. And I think really the Healthy Fall Task Force came out of, I guess, a period in which we were really consumed by emergency management and just really managing the initial stage of the COVID crisis. And pretty quickly after the crisis started, we realized we needed a plan for the fall, and the summer and the fall and beyond. You can only kind of deal with fires in front of you for so long before you realize that you have to look ahead a bit. And we realized we needed some detailed planning on the fall. And the commissioner asked me to chair a task force and to put together that task force. I chose to focus on a relatively small group. There were 11 members of the task force representing all of our campuses. I chaired the task force, and I decided what I wanted to do was to build the task force around the core components of campus life, and that would be academic affairs and student affairs. Doesn't mean to suggest at all that there aren't important financial, budgetary, human resource, legal, facilities, other really, really important aspects of campus life. But I felt we'd build a task force around how we wanted our campuses to operate in the fall, and then build out from there. And one key quality that this task force embodied from the beginning was an ability to deliberate and discuss as a relatively small group, and then to jump out and reach out to those campus networks. Like I mentioned, sometimes numbering upwards of 100 individuals on our larger campuses. Certainly at the OCHI and system level, reaching out to my colleagues in the legal departments, budget and finance, human resources, and perhaps most importantly, reaching out to our local and state level public health officials. We had a great deal of cooperation from our Department of Human Services, our local public health agencies, certainly increasingly as plans became more detailed, medical directors, folks operating on campus to do research in areas relevant to COVID-19. So that ability to focus as a small group and then branch out was an important part of our process.
Brock, may I interrupt?
Yeah.
I have a question about that composition. Key to my approval of this, my willingness to approve the plan, is the involvement of the public health officials. And I noticed that you reached out to them, and I appreciate that. Do we have any guarantees or assurances that going forward and exercising these duties, the task force will include the public health officials, Dr. Holzman? How do we gain some assurance about that?
Well, I think I can assure you of that. And you note in the guidelines, Dr. Holtzman, our Chief Medical Officer, co-wrote the introductory letter with Commissioner Christian. Other folks at DPHHS, Jim Murphy, the Bureau Chief there, was very closely involved with our work. Actually, we had an entire meeting built around collaboration with state level DPHHS. And then as specific instances have warranted, for example, surrounding athletics, we've connected with the local public health officers in relevant communities. I'd note that our campuses have also, of course, communicated with their local public health officers. So Regent Sheehy, my feeling, and I think that it would be a feeling that's shared if you had Dr. Holtzman, Jim Murphy, and others on the call. My feeling is that we've done a very good job of involving those individuals, even if they're not formally part of the Healthy Fall Task Force. And my commitment moving forward would be to continue that direct consultation, collaboration with folks at the state and local level.
Thank you. To the extent that we're authorizing the task force and OG to continue in these efforts and to update, I just wanted you to know that my approval is based upon your assurances that public health will be continually involved, given that they are not official members of the committee.
Understood, Regent Sheehy. So our workflow, it is worth clarifying because I'm not sure I had made this personal and clear to the board, but we met fairly intensively in late April and early May after receiving our charge from Commissioner Christian. We met multiple times a week for a few hours at a time in most cases. And given the public health environment, we met using Zoom, and as another reason to keep the group small and allow for a lot of debate and discussion. In between those meetings, which kind of followed a Thursday, Monday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday pattern, we had a great deal of communication via phone, email, back and forth, and I feel like that was a helpful pattern. That culminated in a June 1st delivery of the Healthy Fall Planning Guidelines to MUS campus CEOs, at which point those campus CEOs took the guidelines, reinvigorated the charge to their own campuses to finalize their own plans for the fall. And I think over the course of the next 6 to 7 weeks, we saw campuses finalize their initial plans for the fall and really flesh out the details of their preparations. Since the delivery of those June 1st planning guidelines from the task force, we've been meeting much more sporadically. We had a June check-in just to see how the campus planning was going and to touch base again. And then of course, with the commissioner's request that we reconvene in early July, we did come together as a full task force and consider a recommendation for a mask requirement on MUS campuses. So the meetings really followed two different patterns, the early intense pattern, and then I would say the more as needed pattern, which is the pattern that we're still in now. I sent a quick update to the task force right before this call and said, you know, I don't expect that we'll have a meeting in the next day or so, but as we have been, let's be prepared to get together as necessary in order to adjust a changing health situation or for any reason charged by the commissioner or the board. Now, I know Amy's been scrolling through the guidelines. Sorry, Amy, for not giving you a good direction in terms of how to scroll through them. I guess let's get to the guidelines. And I'm not going to read through them per se, but I do want to walk you through how we organized these planning guidelines. There are two main elements to the handbook. The first element is fairly short. It's at the top of the document, but it's incredibly important. As the task force went back and forth, we really noticed that a lot of planning guidelines were relevant no matter what type of planning you were talking about. If you were talking about research, these guidelines were important in that area. If you were talking about food services, they were important in that area. So that top part, the integrated guidelines, address elements that we thought were threaded throughout all of our planning. And some of this is related to, you know, basic kind of health and safety measures, the spirit of how we wanted to pursue testing and tracing strategy, communication strategy, how we were thinking about travel, the importance of maintaining accessibility and privacy during this upcoming semester and beyond. They're just guidelines that couldn't be pinned down to one particular area of planning. However, beyond that, and I see this is where we are right now on Amy's screen, we did identify ultimately 11 planning areas. And I want to credit President Bodner for initially kind of identifying this as a possible way of organizing our planning guidelines. But he and I were chatting, and he said, you know, one way to think about this is just to consider what is it that our institutions do on a kind of day-to-day basis. What are the things that comprise our operations on our campuses? And you know, this list has changed a little bit over time, but we ultimately landed on these 11 basic areas for planning. And you'll see it's delivering quality instruction, conducting research and creative scholarship, providing student housing, providing food services, events and welcoming students and visitors to campuses, athletics, providing student support services, staffing campus operations, maintaining buildings and facilities, providing campus transportation, and campus safety and security. Some of these planning areas required us to take quite a deep dive. The one you're looking at right now, delivering quality instruction, it's first for a reason. Not all of our planning areas are in any particular area or order of importance, but we felt like it was really important to lead with delivering quality instruction because that is at the heart of what we do. For each of the planning areas, you see we divided them between essential items and planning considerations. So essential items are areas in which the task force really felt campuses need to have a plan. And if they don't have a plan, they need to explain why. I'll give you one example. We do have some two-year campuses that don't have a residential component. So they don't need to have a plan for providing student housing. But unless there's a scenario like that, we asked campuses to address each one of these bullet points as they built out their campus plans. On the right-hand side of the page, we offered considerations, and these are not necessarily planning requirements, but these are really things that, you know, either we heard from our national partners, we heard from the CDC or other sort of national organizations that were offering some advice on planning. And we thought, gee, it's not necessary for a campus to have a detailed plan in this area, but it's something that they should look at before they get ready to welcome students and faculty and staff back. And Amy, if you can scroll down to providing food services, I think this is kind of an average example, I guess. It kind of captures a typical planning area. And you can see that under the essential items, in some cases, we're referencing national guidelines developed by authorities like the Centers for Disease Control. Some of the bullet points relate to pretty specific planning requirements. The second bullet point, for example, says that campuses will require all dining facility staff to wear face masks and gloves while working and interacting with the public. And then there are some that are sort of more general guidelines. Next to last down there, you'll see we want to have campuses promote more pre-ordering, curbside pickup, delivery, and grab and go food service options. At that point, we as a system-wide task force can't really say exactly what's going to work best for every single campus, but we do want to make sure campuses know that they should be moving in a certain direction. And I think that that captures the spirit of that type of planning guideline quite well. On the right-hand side of the page, the second bullet there, you know, consider establishing additional food service facilities, including food trucks on campus to allow for greater social distancing and less congregation. It is not required for all our campuses to build out a food truck park or anything like that, but we did think that's something we heard campuses were doing, and we thought might be an interesting consideration, and that's why it falls on the right side of the page rather than under essential items. Okay. I'll take a brief pause there, and I do hope we don't go too far down a rabbit hole with questions right now, because I have a little bit more to cover. But are there any questions on how we organize these planning areas or any urgent points that members of the board would like to introduce right now? Okay. So the rest of the document, after you exit the planning areas, there's some basic information on our process, you know, list the task force membership. There are a list of resources, and this list of resources national resources, mostly links, to be honest, has been updated over time. And then importantly, you'll notice that there is an appendix there related to our recommendation for a face covering requirement across MUS campuses. And I guess this is reflective of our ongoing work as a task force. I think you all know this, but in very early July, Commissioner Christian noted the uptick in COVID cases in Montana and nationally, some of the demographic trends within that population of positive COVID cases. He noted, of course, evidence about the effectiveness of face coverings, and he noted increasing discussion in our communities, on our campuses, and importantly among the Board of Regents. And he charged the Healthy Fall Task Force with reconvening to consider a face covering requirement. And so we did on July 8th, and we had a very healthy conversation about that requirement. And ultimately, after that conversation, we did decide to recommend a face covering requirement across MUS campuses. At that point in time, we spent the next 10 days or so putting together planning guidelines for that area specifically. And so the document you're looking at right now is what was issued as an update to the Healthy Fall planning guidelines. I know this document pretty much inside and out. I won't read through it, but I will tell you that it has five key areas. One is a statement about the requirement itself, sort of the scope of the requirement. And I think let the words speak for themselves, but we wanted to be precise here while still allowing campuses the authority to, for example, designate what would define a partially enclosed outdoor space on their campus. No matter how hard the task force worked, we don't have the ability to inventory all of the partial indoor-outdoor spaces on each campus. And so we wanted to be precise, but we still leave room for the campuses to develop their own specific requirement plans. So beyond the statement of the requirement itself, we did have an element defining what constitutes a face covering. I guess a couple of things that come into play there. You might note that there's some language surrounding face shields. This was a topic of conversation, especially when it comes to individuals who have a need to perhaps read lips in order to understand communication. And it also came up as a possible method for safely delivering classroom lectures. It might improve upon the kind of cloth or surgical mask face covering. We outlined some exceptions when individuals on our campuses would not be required to wear a face covering. Beyond exceptions, outlined specific accommodations, certainly noting that certain individuals be accommodated if for whatever reason they had an unavoidable challenge associated with wearing a face covering. And then no way around it, one of the trickiest areas around accountability. How do we want to promote compliance with a face covering requirements? And each campus actually also needs to approach this differently because they have different protocols. They have some existing policies and they have different protocols around classroom management, student conduct protocols. So what we offered were, again, a set of fairly specific guidelines, but guidelines for campuses to follow as they considered what their own constraints were. And our emphasis throughout has been on really an initial approach that emphasizes communication, engagement, education, encouragement, and providing lots of opportunities for compliance. However, we also know that it's important in the face of kind of willful and repeated non-compliance to equip campuses with a sort of framework for disciplinary action if that is warranted down the road. So that is, I think, the most significant update to the Healthy Fall guidelines that we've seen thus far. Presently, it's happening more within the domain of our research epidemiologists, within our medical directors, in collaboration with Department of Public Health and Human Services, the governor's office, and others. But our discussion now is really around testing strategy as we head towards the fall. And I could imagine at some point in time coming back with a potential update to the Healthy Fall guidelines surrounding testing strategy. Still in the discussion phase, clearly that's an urgent item to address, but we're still finalizing plans there. I do think the main point around testing is that our trajectory allows us to say, folks who want to get tested as they return to campus are going to be able to receive a COVID-19 test. And I think there's a lot that goes on around that, but that's, I think, the spirit of our planning in that area. Well, I promise I'm ready to wrap up now. In fact, I am ready.
Can I ask a question about that last part?
Yeah.
I think the masks are a good example. I'm just going to use it as an example of my question. Prior to July 8th, we weren't requiring masks or recommending them. After July 8th, we are. We're asking the campuses to come forward by August 1 with a plan, as I understand, about masking. With respect to this element and others by analogy, what happens if the state, through the governor, for example, imposes a more restrictive guideline or recommendation? Can the campuses deviate under your plan from a governor mandated
I forwarded you
requirement?
the new link. It was hard to match. Yeah.
Sorry, I heard there was a bit of an interference there. Other sided.
If you're on the call, please hit mute.
So my question, Brock, is, did you get my question?
I did, yeah, I got it. And and it might not be a satisfying answer, Regent Sheehy, but Regent Sheehy, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I think we've been successful thus far in kind of navigating any kind of relational element of our planning, both locally and at the state level, on a case-by-case basis. And I think the way things have worked right now, we've really been aligned with planning and requirements at the state and local level. I can tell you it is a consideration, and I think that it's a great part of our open communication channels. And I think if that kind of gap, I guess, were to emerge, we would address it as it came. But fortunately, we've been really in good communication and good alignment thus far.
I appreciate that. I just want to make sure I know what I'm voting for today. Am I voting for a plan that supersedes governor mandates, or am I voting for a plan that reaches out to the governor?
Well, I think you're voting for a plan that reaches out to the governor. I guess I would emphasize that, pretty much step by step, we've been in communication with the governor's office and the governor on these. And so the plan as it stands now, and I think the item does address the possibility that the guidelines will evolve over time, but the plan as it stands now is very much in alignment with the governor's office. And I do apologize. I guess that's kind of the extent of what I can say right now. This is in alignment with what we've heard from the governor's office today. And clearly, if there were adjustments on either end, I'd be astonished if we were not really in vigorous communication as those new guidelines or requirements were being developed by either party. Yeah. So, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Regent Sheehy, did you have any other?
No, I understand your answer.
Okay. And Deputy Commissioner Tessman, does that wrap up your presentation?
It wraps up the first quarter of it. Do you want me to enter this? That's it. I'm ready to stand for any questions, Mr. Chair, members of the board.
And Amy, if you could go back to the agenda and just pull up the action item, and I think we can use this document as a reference in terms of the follow-up questions for Deputy Commissioner Tessman, but I just want to hone us in on the action item that we have in front of us. Really, the action item does the action item really does four things. It adopts the guidelines that have been prepared and shared by Deputy Commissioner Tessman, instructs the commissioner to implement the plan. It authorizes the commissioner to modify the guidelines as context, like I said, evolves. And then it allows for the implementation of the guidelines and the inclusion of conversations at the guidelines at our meetings, regularly scheduled board meetings, sort of moving forward until we have a discussion that we want to remove those from our agenda. So those really are the kind of the four core items of the action item that we have before us that we will make a motion on at the end of the meeting. I will pause right there and maybe open it up for any questions, specific questions that that board members have for Deputy Commissioner Tessman.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Regent Tess.
Yeah, thank you. Deputy Commissioner, I have a question relative to a part of the document that we're reviewing today relative to mental health. As you and others on this call know, this is a board that has placed mental health at the very top of our list of priorities for the entire university system, large and small campuses. And if I saw this correctly, it appears that focusing in a formal way relative to COVID-19 on mental health issues with our campus community is listed under a planning consideration and not kind of the essential component of this document. Could you explain to the board about the deliberations around mental health that you had and perhaps why it's there and not under the essential category?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Regent Tuss, I think that's an excellent point. And we've gone through a couple of different stages of our discussions surrounding mental health and student wellness more generally. And I'm going to focus on students. I would note that this conversation holds true for faculty and staff and other employees in our campus communities as well. But initially, of course, the crisis itself and the general move off of campus, the transition to remote learning, I think the anxiety surrounding COVID-19 provided a great number of challenges for our campuses as they wanted to serve students. I think campuses did an admirable job this spring in transitioning to various telehealth and kind of remote delivery of counseling services. I think this summer has offered an opportunity for campuses to regroup and redesign those strategies, knowing full well that Montana and I'd say all other states were already grappling with the mental health crisis among students prior to COVID-19. Without getting into specifics, I would just say generally, the world today seems to present our students with a vast array of mental health challenges, I guess is the best way to put it. So even prior to COVID-19, this has been a key issue for the system. You may know that we have a mental health and suicide prevention task force that's been in existence for a number of years. This past year has been reinvigorated and recharged by our Director of Student Affairs and Student Engagement, Christine Miller, as well as a dedicated AmeriCorps Vista just focusing on student wellness and mental health. And those two individuals, along with mental health and counseling support teams on our campuses, have planning well underway and recognize that there are a unique set of challenges associated with the fall and COVID-19. However, our campuses are resourced very differently. I might be so bold as to say that it's possible our campuses are all under-resourced compared to where they'd like to be in this area, but they're vastly different in terms of the amount of mental health resources they have to bring to bear. And so we wanted to account for that variation in terms of how we incorporated this into the guidelines. I don't think there's any doubt that every single one of our campuses will take special attention to mental health challenges for our students this fall, but maybe more than any other area, there wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach here. I'll be candid with you as I'm looking at it now, the way that item is worded, I don't think that there's any reason it couldn't shift over to the required essential items column, even if it meant that a campus had to say, look, we have half an FTE that we can really dedicate to this, and so there are limits to what we can do. So that could certainly be a point for further discussion as we get closer to the fall. Whether or not it's on the right side or the left side of the page, I can tell you that all of the campuses do have plans in place for mental health related to COVID-19.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. And certainly if it's possible, like I said at the opening, this board takes this very seriously. Whenever we have a conversation about mental health on campus, it's a pretty serious conversation. And you know that we prioritize this. So if it's possible to shift that over to essential, I think it just puts an exclamation point about the priorities of this board and the system on mental health. I'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Regent Tuss.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Tuss. Any other questions from members of the board?
Mr. Chair.
Regent Nystuen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deputy Commissioner Tessman, kudos to you and the entire team for this great document. We know you couldn't solve every question, every issue along the line, but I think you've given some great framework for how we might proceed this fall. Question I have really relates back to what I deal with in my private sector job, and it's quite often, almost on a daily basis, we're called upon to make decisions about what do we do when there is an employee that comes in or reports that they are COVID positive. One of the things we've had is a pandemic team that really helps understand and evaluate current situations for what direction do we go. Do we end up doing a closing of a branch? Do we do a deep cleaning? What are the procedures for communications with the rest of the team and other key stakeholders within our business? And I know it'd be difficult to describe for the various 11 campuses their exact approach to communications, but I think it's something that I'd be curious to know. How are they totally on their own? So in other words, if there is, let's say, a positive individual or two or a department like at MSU Bozeman, is President Cruzado and her team going to make the decisions as to what they do as far as closing a building, informing other students, faculty, workers, and so forth? And certainly sometimes the press gets wind of this, and certainly they would like answers and so forth. What's the overall approach to communications and making decisions on how you react to various situations on those campuses? So I don't know if that's an approach for you, Deputy Commissioner Tessman, question for you or the commissioner or the campuses. I'm curious to know a little bit more about the communications and how to deal with situations that do bubble up here for this fall. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take a stab at it. However, I see a yellow box around Commissioner Christian, so I know that he may have something to say too. Commissioner, would you like to? I'm happy to take that, but I don't know if you wanted to jump in.
Mr. Chair, Regent Nystuen, so there's a lot of planning going into that very topic, and you know, I mean, I think to properly set the stage, we anticipate that those things will happen. And we will need to deal with those. And we're empowering campuses right now to make those decisions, how they will deal with the necessities that will come out of it. As far as communicating, I think we've been pretty clear that we will rely on our working relationship with community, county health, officials. They are the ones in charge with the results, and they're the ones in charge with contact tracing. We'll work any way we can to facilitate that. And we have had discussions that in some cases, if the local or state health officials deem that, you know, a pocket of positive cases, a hot spot, if you will, or however you want to characterize it, poses an additional threat to campus, that they may very well identify, you know, a building, a classroom, whatever happens to be the most pertinent identifier, so that individuals that have frequented either a building or a class or a spot on campus or all those things would be made aware at a broader sense that's beyond, you know, sort of the specificity of contact tracing. But ultimately, that piece is sort of left in the hands and the guidance that we receive from local, county, and state health officials, and we'll continue to work closely with them. But moving beyond the sort of notice side, yeah, when we have instances, I think much like other businesses, as you described are doing, we will do what is necessary. That may mean shutting down a class. It may mean shutting down a building. It may mean all kinds of things. A floor of a building that we can properly sanitize, let the contact tracing do its job, enough time allowed, and then reopen as it's as safe as possible to do that. Similar to what you're seeing in private sector businesses all over since the reopening of the state. I think we'll follow similar logic. Mr. Deputy, you got anything to add to that?
Commissioner Christian, sure, those are members of the board. Not really. My understanding in our conversations has really been, you know, again, we would deal with situations locally as they emerge, certainly following the lead of public health on tracing and notifying. But, you know, it's always striking to me how different our campuses are and how different our communities are. And I would imagine it'd be quite possible that we could have a challenging situation on one part of one campus, or maybe on one campus, that would not necessitate the same kind of action or reaction across the state, and a campus has not been affected by whatever that instance is. So I think I could imagine that we'd have some variation in terms of how campuses were reacting to the positive cases, or the need to sanitize or shut down a classroom or a building or whatnot.
Thank you, Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner Tessman. And I appreciate your question, Regent Nystuen. That was a question that I was very interested in terms of what our plan is and how we were going to manage the communication as things emerge and evolve. Maybe in that same vein of communication, I think you said something, Brock, that was really important at the sort of top of your presentation about, you know, to ensure as healthy of a start and healthy as a fall semester that we can have. It's really going to depend on collective responsibility of everyone who's on campuses, or on our campuses, and even community members. And I know you noted in the guidelines, one of the integrated ideas around communication, and I'm particularly interested in how we're going to go about ensuring that we're sharing these guidelines, particularly with students. The guidelines as they are written now and as they sort of evolve, how are we going to share that with students who will be coming onto campuses in the next few weeks, so that they understand the context that they're walking into and what their collective responsibility is to make sure we have a healthy start to the academic year.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, that is unquestionably the heart of the matter. We need students and employees to understand that if we want that in-person experience, which I think people want that, then this is what it's going to take. And I think these guidelines are a good start. I honestly think that the campus plans are probably a better starting point for most students and employees. And then even going beyond that, if I turn back the wheel of time and think about myself as an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old, I'm not sure I would digest a 30-page document with different protocols and rules. And I can tell you that our communications director, Karen Ogden, has been working with communications teams across the system so that campuses build a communications campaign, basically a marketing and communications campaign around what it's going to take to stay open this fall. And I think that takes place through social media, through signage, through conversations that happen on campus. It takes place through leadership by example, both student government, student leaders, and administrative and faculty leaders. So that is well underway. And an individual on one of our 2 largest campuses said, look, this is probably going to be the biggest student-based communication campaign we've ever engaged in. And I think that highlights how important it is to our campuses to make sure students understand what it's going to take.
Excellent. Other questions or comments from members of the board?
I have one.
Sorry. Regent Sheehy.
Just to follow up on Dr. Tessman, I didn't know 18-year-old Brock, but I am betting that 18-year-old Brock would indeed have read and digested a 30-page program.
You're probably right.
But I also have a serious question or a comment. With respect to the item that's in front of us, I want to be clear what it is that I think we're doing and the importance of why we're doing it. Just as the virus and its effects are moving very quickly, the authority granted to each of these units, to us as board members, to OCHI, it moves just as quickly. It's very hybrid, this authority. Sometimes it's the day-to-day operation of campuses and it's in the campus. Sometimes it's an overall policy decision that normally sits with us. Because of this fast-moving authority that goes back and forth between all of these, among all of these entities, I think it's really important that as regents, we adopt a system of authorizing the actions that will be taken on a day-to-day basis, so that in the event that there is some delegation of authority, it's not implied, it's explicit. I think that's important for the public. I think it's important for our confidence in what we're doing here. And I also think it's important to back up the process that's been put in place. I have no problems with the process. I am deeply appreciative of the amount of time and effort that Brock and his colleagues on the task force, you've just done an amazing and intensive search here. And I recognize that it's going to continue. I want you to continue with authority. I may not agree with everything in your plan, but I want to be on board with agreeing who has the authority to do what in these interims between meetings. For that reason, it was really important to me that our action item today include some accountability and an end date. So that's why I'm very strong on the idea that this must come before the board at every meeting until we officially revoke this delegation or authorization of authority with respect to running our campuses. That's my interest in this. I think we want to do this right, and I think we are doing it right, but I want the board's position to be no, and the flow of authority to be transparent.
Thank you, Regent Sheehy.
Chair, Regent Sexton also had her hand up. I don't know if you can, who you can see or not.
I cannot. Regent Sexton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I wanted to follow up a little bit on the communication with students. And I just wanted to say, first off, thank you so much to the members of the Healthy Task Force. I can only imagine how difficult it is to create a framework when everything is changing, not only by the day, but by the hour. So I just really want to extend my own personal appreciation of all the work that you've done and will continue to do. And I did want to mention as well how impressed I've been by the Montana Associated students and the student leadership on campuses. They are so heavily bought into this. I know everyone, myself included, cares about staying healthy and achieving a quality education. So I'm sure everyone is in contact with the student leadership, but I really think that working through that as an outlet to communicate with the rest of the students is a great way to do that personally, as well as everything else all the other communication outlets. I also did want to mention one thing that is missing from the guidelines, and I have communicated this to the commissioner's office, and I know they're working on it, but it was brought to my attention by the Montana Associated students that for any classes that were moved online prior to the start of classes, and only because of COVID, that this is triggering some technology fees that students weren't otherwise anticipating paying. And I just want to make sure that students aren't facing an undue financial burden from the method of their instruction shifting to online. And again, I know that the commissioner's office is working on this, and I really appreciate them doing that. So I just thought I should mention it as it was communicated to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Sexton. Any other questions or comments from members of the board?
Mr. Chair, I simply acknowledge, I appreciate Regent Sheehy's efforts in doing this right, and hence the meeting today, and we appreciate the guidance there, and also to Regent Sexton. We are working on the fee issue. This is never supposed to be a money maker. It's how do we all survive this thing as best we can and get to the other side of it. Minimizing, to be honest, the impacts on students, absolutely, but also minimizing the impact to campuses who desperately need resources to continue to provide services to students, and on and on. So we'll continue to look at both of those issues. The other thing that came up in the call, I wanted to add my voice. You can count on us relying heavily on our working relationship with state officials. Regent Sheehy, to your earlier question, there really is no plan that doesn't involve state and local health, and we're highly aware of that, and we'll continue to work closely. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. I too just wanted to thank the task force and Deputy Commissioner Tessman again, and Commissioner for the care that you've put into gleaning feedback from community, from campuses, from students, to be able to pull together these guidelines with some level of agility between considerations and essential items. I recognize this has been a labor of love to some degree for everyone on the task force, and I appreciate the many emails and messages that I've received, and I'm sure other board members have received, sharing their perspectives, community members sharing their perspectives on the work that we're trying to do to make sure our campus communities are safe throughout the course of the fall. So I appreciate everyone's insights there. And additionally, Regent Sheehy for urging us to continue to make sure this was top of mind, and that we had a formal meeting to discuss and adopt and instruct the commissioner to implement the plan, and to continue to make sure it's on our agenda. I think this is absolutely critical component of what we do as regents. We're entrusted, and we have fiduciary duties as public officials, and health and safety are at the very top of what our responsibilities are. And I'm very comfortable and confident that we've got the task force, and we've got campus community really leaning into the importance of these discussions, and to make sure that that we're doing everything the best we can in a good way to protect our campus communities. So with that, unless there's any other questions or comments, we will move to a motion to approve. Any questions or comments before?
Mr. Chair, I'd move we approve this request for adoption of the MUS Healthy Fall 2020 planning guidelines for the campuses.
All right. Motion approved by Regent Nystuen. Is there any discussion or corrections from members of the board?
Mr. Chair, I would simply ask about the conversation we had earlier about the mental health components and putting that under the essential category versus the planning considerations. Dr. Tessman, you indicated that that would be possible in the final document. Can we be assured that that'll happen?
Mr. Chair, Regent Tuss, what I'll say is I'll communicate that to the task force, I think, out of consideration for their involvement in the process. If for any reason there's resistance to that, I will immediately let you know, but I can commit to that change. As chair of the task force, I can commit to that change today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion or comments from members of the board? Is there any discussion or comments from the campuses? And if so, please use the raise your hand feature located at the bottom of the screen or dial *9 if joining by phone. Is there any discussion or comments from campuses?
Chair Loser, I'm seeing none at this time.
Thank you, Amy. Is there any public comment? If so, please use the raise your hand feature or dial *9 if you're joining by phone. Is there any public comment? Amy?
Still checking, but so far seeing none, Chair Loser.
Thank you. Seeing no further comment, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Excellent. Let's move on to the last part of our meeting. We are at the point in the meeting where we're open to take public comment. And so please use the raise your hand feature located at the bottom of the screen or dial *9. And once called upon, please state your first name and your last name for the record. And we ask that you're concise with your comments to afford others the same opportunity. Is there any public comment? Is there any public comment? If so, please use your raise your hand feature located at the bottom of the screen or dial *9. Is there any public comment? Amy, any public comment?
Chair Loser, seeing none.
Okay, last call. Is there any public comment? Well, seeing no public comment, again, thank you to members of the board for freeing up your schedule for this important conversation. Thank you for Deputy Commissioner Tessman for all of your work and the work that you have in front of you as you manage the opening of our campuses. Last thing I'd underscore is that idea of collective responsibility. We all have our hand in making sure that the start of our semester and the continuation of the semesters goes as best it can, considering the public health issues that we have in front of us. So thank you all. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bottom right hand corner.